Yeah, and we have a very important conversation to get to because women in Iran continue to demonstrate following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who died in the custody of the morality police. She was detained for allegedly not wearing her hijab properly. So, I want to get your reaction to this story, Ryan. Sorry, Cynthia, I'll start with you.
I mean, I was watching, along with the rest of the world, these videos of women burning their hijabs, and you know, the benefit of living in a world where social media connects us all is that people are seeing this. The terrifying thing is that these women put themselves out there in this way, and I'm just thinking about how now is there potentially a target on their back? We know people use video footage to find people. They used this during the January 6th insurrection. So that was used for good to find people. In this case, it terrifies me to think of the possible consequences. You know, it's interesting to think these rules around the wearing of the hijab has been around since the 80s. 81, I believe, was the time when they came into effect. And since then, there have been lots of protests sporadically at times from women. As recently as 2019, there was actually a woman who set herself on fire after she was arrested for attending a men's soccer game. And the world heard about this story.
This was in Iran?
This was in Iran, and the world heard about this story and they reacted. So bowing to government pressure, now in Iran, women can attend men's soccer games. Now they are relegated to a particular area. But that's an example of global interest in a story making an impact and having some amount of change. It's tiny when you compare it. I think of that as a positive effect. But then I think about Afghanistan. And when you think about the many, many years and the amount of money and the amount of deaths that have occurred while trying to make an impact on a change of an environment. And now, what do we have? We have young women who aren't allowed to go back to school, right? So I think these things happen in tiny changes. It doesn't mean people shouldn't be speaking out. People should be speaking out. I understand that Canada just put on some sanctions. Like, the world needs to be talking about this, and men need to be talking about this as well.
Men need to be talking about this as well, absolutely. But I think, you know, I asked myself, and you know, my sister is dating someone who is from Iran, and he has sisters, et cetera. And, you know, I think to myself, they're in Canada now, and I think, what is the broader scope of this? Why, you know, do women or should women in countries like Canada care and stand up in solidarity with women in Iran? And I think in my mind, there's two reasons for that. Number one, I think it was Hillary Clinton who said an attack on women's rights is an attack on all human rights. And so it's not a woman thing. It's a human rights issue. But secondly, when we stand up in solidarity with women's rights, which feel like they are increasingly being stripped, not just in Iran or Afghanistan, United States of America, it starts to feel like, you know what? If we do not stand up to use our voices to protect all women across the world, we have a very bleak future potentially ahead of us. And I've got a daughter, and I need to be teaching her the ways. But I also think that standing up in solidarity, in this case with Persian women, is to also remind ourselves that freedom is never free. It constantly needs to be defended. And it is also a reminder to whatever government is sitting in this country, we are here. You see that we are upset about that? Don't you dare think of touching our rights here, because we are here. So the visibility, it's about visibility that you do that. That country is feeling worldwide pressure, I think, that hopefully maybe will make a difference. So you stand up for your sister wherever she is in the world, because you hope that she stands up for you if something happens.
Absolutely. It's very interesting. As a journalist, I'm looking at this story, and it reminds me so much of George Floyd, where you have a situation where there's video. Video is so key. When there's no video, people can easily forget about a person, and their name never even becomes a hashtag. And the video of this young woman collapsing, much like the video of George Floyd begging for his life, and then all of a sudden it sparks. But prior to that, there were so many people who were incarcerated and killed by the government and police and all of this nonsense that was going on. But it's this one person that enacts all of this change. And we're seeing, like you said, like everybody has said, we're seeing this huge reaction. Women are burning their hijabs. They're saying, they're speaking out, they're covering their hair, they're doing everything. But then also, I think it's about the way that the rest of the world reacts to Iran, I think is very important. Like just recently, CBS correspondent Leslie Stahl did an interview with the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, and there were rules. a lot of stipulations. She had to have her head covered. She could not sit down before him. She could not interrupt him. And she did all of those things to have that interview. And that interview actually happened the week that Amini was murdered. And she did bring up the fact that there were all of these rules. Of course, he did not address it. Then just a few days later, Christiana Amanpour from CNN was supposed to also interview him, and she did not bow down to those rules. And guess what? He didn't show up. So I think there's also a call to action for journalists also to not bow down to these rules when you're interviewing these leaders who are enacting these horrible things and resulting in the death of a young woman because she's showing a little bit of hair outside of her headscarf. And so it's going to be interesting. I'm cautiously optimistic that there will be change, but we're talking about something that is woven into the fabric of a culture and a people, and it's not going to be so easy as to have one protest and everything's, like, we know that's not going to just happen overnight. I am worried for the women who are speaking out because they've now shut down their social media, so no one can, because this is the way that we are all knowing about this story, right? So they shut it down, and that makes me worry for the women who are in those countries.
Because the last time that happened, when they shut down the internet, there are reports that up to 1,500 people were murdered in protests.
And that's, because
So there's the darkness that kicks in.
The movement, because I feel like we think that when there's protests that they will listen, and it's like, I feel like in older regimes, it's like, no, they're gonna tighten. They're gonna shut down all of that free speech, tighten, and then they're gonna really reprimand anybody who spoke up and their families and intimidate so it doesn't happen again. So it was too early to say what's gonna happen, but I'm really very worried for the women in that country, although I am behind them 100% in their protesting, because what happened was heinous and disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, this country, we are relatively comfortable, right? Most of us generally know where our next meal is coming from. And I talk a lot about in my work, you know, what is Canadian culture? How do we define ourselves as Canadian? And it used to be Don Cherry on Saturday nights and snow machines and pickup trucks, right? And this country needs to continue to create an environment that upholds people's rights, women's rights, human rights, and it has to inspire the rest of the world. But we are not free of this conversation here. Bill C-21 in Quebec, right? Calling on public servants to not wear the hijab inside of their own workplace. Like, this conversation is here too. And so we, like, as Canadians, like to say, well, you know, we're doing okay here. No. And so to me, when people's rights are slowly eroded and taken away, we need to stop that. We need to stomp that out and call it what it is. And this type of extremism in our own backyards needs to be called for what it is. And this country is not free of it. And these ideologies are here. And it's time for this country to, well, it's always time for this country to continue to check in, to talk about what's important to us here, to inspire the world in the ways that Canada has in the past.
Hey there, wasn't that great? Do you know where you can find some equally good content? Our YouTube page. It's filled with discussions, debates, and some laughs. Head there now, like and subscribe.